Hey everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar. I think we are live, everyone. So my name is Bear Jackian, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. Today's webinar is on the topic of K-12 interoperability, why it matters, and how district tech leaders are making it work. Here on this slide, you can all see that we do have the opportunity for audience participation. We love audience participation. And so you all should be able to see this screen on your respective screens. This is a method of submitting questions. And so as we're going along, we'd love for you to sort of submit questions and ideas. You will be muted during today's webinar, but we still love to hear from you. So please do take advantage of that questions area, and it will help direct our conversation today. Today we're actually also offering a professional development certificate. Some folks find these helpful, and so attendees of today's webinar can receive a certificate for 1 hour PD. The way to get that is to look for a follow-up email with a web link and key code to receive that. So be on the lookout for an email after today's webinar. These are the distinguished members of our webinar today. So again, my name is Bear Jackian. I'm the moderator for today. I'm the founder and CEO here at ClassLink. We also have on the line Kyle Berger. He is the CTO over at Grapevine Colleyville ISD. We also have George Perot. He's our Chief Academic Officer here at ClassLink. And we also have Jeff Janover, and he is our VP of Interoperability. Just to give you a little bit of background, Kyle has served districts throughout Texas for the past 17 years. He's led technology teams through a number of transformative periods. Not only a well-known tech leader in Texas, Kyle is a pretty highly regarded advocate for open technology standards, so it's great having him on today's call. Insofar with regards to George, prior to coming on board to ClassLink, George was the Director of Instructional Technology and Library Media Services over at Orange County Public Schools in Florida. Capped off his 40-year career there, beginning first as a teacher on through administration and then as a technology leader. George has guided Orange County Public Schools through increasingly sophisticated use of technology in the classroom, and today I think it's great that we have George because he also serves as the chair of the steering committee related to One Roster Open Data Standard, and we're going to be talking a whole lot about that. Just to give you a little background about Jeff as well, Jeff has spent a career in education technology, 19 years as the Director of Technology for Wall Township Public Schools here in New Jersey. He's now currently our VP of Interoperability Services here at ClassLink, and he eats, drinks, and sleeps One Roster and Open Data Standards. Again, my name is Berge, and I'm going to be the moderator for today. The agenda. So here's our agenda for today's chat. We really look at it as a bit of a dialogue, actually. We're going to have a conversation among the folks here that are on today's call. We'll begin first by a little bit of introduction. We'll go around, and then we're going to jump right on into sort of the challenges of interoperability. And our concept here is to really look at it as a past, present, and future. We kind of see that as a continuum there. We'll share a little bit of war stories, talk about what is the reality today and where we all see this heading. I think there's also some instructive lessons that we're going to talk about from other industries, and then we're just going to do a quick debrief on what's the very latest on current standards in this area. So that's the flow of today's conversation. I'm asked sometimes, well, Berge, tell us a little bit about your organization. If you've never heard of us, ClassLink has been serving education for almost 20 years now. We have implementations around the world of our products, primarily known as a single sign-on system, but increasingly rostering is absolutely an imperative when we start talking about getting students easier access to their resources. And here's what we're generally known for is single sign-on, analytics, and rostering. All right, enough of that. And now, Kyle, I'm going to invite you as our first panelist. Kyle, you want to just share with everybody here on the phone call a little bit of background of Grapevine Colleyville yourself and things that you're working on today.
All right, thank you, Barry. So for me, here in Grapevine Colleyville, we're located in the North Texas area. I have a little over 13,000 students here in Grapevine. And overall, I started the adventure, so to say, here in Grapevine about 6 months ago. In my previous district, I'd been down the road of one roster integration and moved towards interoperability. So led me over here to Grapevine Colleyville to start that same transformation for our students, spread across about 19 campus locations.
Very nice. Thank you. George, you want to give us sort of a thumbnail and introduction to yourself as well? I don't have a fancy slide for you here, but you know what I'll do? I'll put back the pictures of all our headshots. George?
Well, that's okay. Nobody needs to see that. As during the intro, Bears was talking about the, sort of my background, and coming from being the instructional technology director for the 10th largest school district in the country, it was a real issue and a real struggle trying to get information to school districts. So what happened is I was in charge of instructional tech, and then somebody, they decided I should be in charge of libraries. And then at some point, due to probably missing a meeting, I found out that they were bringing all the textbooks back centrally to the district and that I was in charge. So what happened is it really gave me an opportunity. We call them growth opportunities, which is a euphemism for other duties as assigned. And what happened is now the publishers were dealing with the instructional technology person as opposed to, let's say, traditional textbook folks who are in curriculum departments who are mostly concerned about paper and the box of stuff that comes in the teacher kits and that sort of thing. So it allowed me to change the whole conversation, especially given the size of the budget that a large district has.
All right, excellent. And Jeff, you want to just share a few words of intro for yourself there as well? And then we're going to jump right into a conversation.
Sure, thanks, Bears. So my background is actually in engineering. I'm an engineer by birth. I spent the first 20 years of my career working as a structural engineer and consultant, and then got into education. As Bears said, I worked as a director of technology for about 19 years, altogether about 21 years in education. And during that time, did a lot of database work and got involved in exactly the kind of challenges that all of you are experiencing right now. I recently joined ClassLink as the VP of Interoperability Services, and I think the challenges are steep, and I think they can certainly be handled, and I think that's the kind of stuff that we're going to get into right now. I'm very excited about working with ClassLink, and excited about providing the kind of services I think that districts around the country really need.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so our conversation, interoperability, it's always fun to have a dictionary slide up here. So interoperability is the idea of exchanging information between systems. That's going to be the sort of the context of our conversation today. And we went to the trouble of preparing what I thought is a pretty accurate depiction here graphically of how the world of data sets seems to work in education. And this is, I'm sure, still incomplete, although there's a lot of circles there. And there's a lot of data exchange between all of these different systems. For today, we're probably going to be focusing on these two, the ones that are highlighted here. How do we get enrollment information between systems, and that's really about the class rosters. And then also perhaps the authentication between these systems. Although my sense is we're going to probably talk more about the first. And so if we had to sort of redraw that scary spaghetti view, I think it would look something like this. And the idea here is how can we bring some standardization really to sharing the enrollment data? Because I think we're all sort of pretty familiar individually with needing to create custom extracts of enrollment data for all the different systems that need the list of students. Is there a way to bring some standardization to all that? So it's always fun to kind of talk about these things in sort of this context of past, present, future. So let's jump right on in. And Kyle, I'm going to go to you first. I think people want to know present and future, but I always think it's good to sort of level set. Tell us a little bit about sort of the past. I have my cute little graphic here. That's you, Kyle, I think, when you were a young guy.
Yeah. Exactly.
What part of Texas was that?
So talking about the past, especially through interoperability, sometimes I feel like I'm living in the past still. You know, the big challenge that we had of all these resources now going digital and coming to us, as George kind of mentioned, that, you know, in the past, technology was separated from a lot of this curriculum, procedures around getting textbooks and resources. We were an afterthought. We didn't need to be involved. Then all of a sudden what started happening is this flood of resources coming to, and people coming down to the tech offices saying, hey, how are we, I just bought all this, now we need to make it work. So the past was spreadsheet upon spreadsheet of custom written forms and custom data sets of exchanging data out through the world, through companies, sometimes in scary, unsecure manners, to sometimes some manners that we didn't even quite understand ourselves, leading to districts having to acquire, just like we had to do, acquire additional staff just to keep up with this and start finding new positions on how can we make all these tools that we're buying actually work together. So the past was a mess of twine, a ball of twine, like you kind of had in that picture there for us. And I don't know if that's what y'all were experiencing, Jeff, and in your past district as well, but it was just a overbearing cluster that we had to try to sort through.
I think you're exactly right, Kyle. I think, and if we go back even further than that, you know, I remember a time where all of the online, it wasn't really online access. It was, you know, more like students using programs directly on computers, and there wasn't a whole lot of data interchange. Life was a little bit simpler back then from the perspective of, you know, where is my data? Well, it's sitting on the computer that's at your desk, and that lack of interoperability, I think, you know, may have made life a little bit easier perhaps, but I think in the long run it wasn't doing students very good. Certainly as we move into, you know, the present era where everything is online and you really have to challenge your students. You know, if you're not doing it, you're not engaging your students the way they need to be engaged. I always like to say that, you know, we're competing with Xbox with these students, and we've got to engage them. And a lot of the online applications, certainly the availability is much higher than it was years and years ago in terms of what you can put in front of a student. But I think, you know, the overall requirements to get these things running, you know, the complete lack of or lack of the need for interoperability was there. But you're right, you know, as we got into these online applications, it was like the Wild West of data, and no one knew where their information was, and information was lost on a regular basis. And you know, we're still seeing some of that now with, you know, in terms of the present. We'll talk about that in a moment. But you know, a lot of school districts still struggle with, you know, exactly where their data is and how to manage it. It was a big problem, and it still is today to a certain extent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would agree. And just to piggyback on what you all said, is, you know, it used to be when you had an adoption for curriculum, they had the textbooks, and people were poring over the textbooks and all the brightly colored things that are there, and then they would say, you know what, you know, we've got this online piece, and the people were making decisions go, yeah, that's really nice, and it was a nice to have. So, you know, fast forward here, just a very few years, and then all of a sudden that pendulum has changed, where the digital is becoming the primary method of instruction, and the paper is becoming supplement or emergency type things. So much so that, you know, during my last adoption, which was a secondary ELA adoption, we only purchased class sets of books, and that was it. So we were not going to do that, and sometimes the ELA folks were not very happy about that. But to your point about multiple spreadsheets and the kinds of things, the kind of pain that we went through, I pointed out to someone just the other day that I was creating extracts for the Houghton Mifflin Think Central platform, and then we had the MyHRW platform, and the two formats were different. You know, coming from basically the same parent company, and don't get me started with what used to be, at least, the Pearson SuccessNet, SuccessNet Plus, Realize. You know, everybody had, it was a separate format everywhere you went. So if we had kids get in by Thanksgiving, we felt pretty good about ourselves.
Amen. Yeah.
George, it's an interesting thing that you said. I had heard once someone that was very wise once said that Generation X and earlier must have paper. Generation Y can tolerate paper, and Generation Z and later will not tolerate paper.
I like that. All right,
Absolutely.
So this is good conversation. This is Brad again. So here's what I'm doing, and I'm doing it in the background. I'm going to make it available to everyone. You all can still see my screen, right? What I've created here is a Google Doc, and I'm taking real-time notes. I have friends here that are doing the same thing of our conversations. In fact, Gary, do me a favor. Can you put a link to this in the chat box, so maybe other people who are on the line, they're free to come into this document as well, and you can kind of see these real-time notes as we're chatting. And here's some of the things that you all spoke about, how we're moving from, well, the past was really moving from just a few online products that need roster to nearly every product needing roster. So that was a big shift. Just the fact that moving to online resources was also a big shift in the past. Let's sort of zoom into today's reality. So where are we today with this kind of thing? And maybe George, this is not a bad place to start the conversation of one roster and sort of progress. We should probably think of it bigger, right? Because there has been other movements to bring standards to this particular area of interoperability. And so that's probably fair to talk a little bit about that, right?
Yeah, I mean, so this sort of bleeds into things that have happened and the number of opportunities that are out there. We had the School Interoperability Framework, SIF, was something that was out there. We had embraced it in Orange County. We don't hear a lot about it today, but that was one of sort of the recent memory to bring some kind of order to the way that we exchange data. And then came InBloom, which was an interesting concept. It had a lot of funding behind it, but I sat through a number of presentations and never really did understand what it was trying to do. And of course, we all know what happened with InBloom, and it sort of fell off the face of the earth. So when I was at the district, I approached IMS Global because I was an active member there, and I was saying to them, it doesn't matter whether you've got 200 kids or 200,000 kids. We're all having the same issues. We've got to bring some standardization, to this, because it's not rocket science. So, I mean, this is where we are right now, because what we're trying to do is to get all the multiple vendors to accept the same file format, because the one roster standard includes basically all of the metadata necessary to do rostering. But some of these, let's face it, some of these systems that are out there are legacy systems, and instead what's been happening is districts are paying the curriculum providers, yet the heavy lifting is being done by the IT department. And so as one roster has become more mature with larger districts, larger publishers accepting this standard, and it's still very much, it's got a tremendous amount of momentum, but we still got a long way to go in terms of making sure that more and more publishers adopt this, so that we can have a single file format. In my experience, an IT department doesn't mind creating one file format, and even spending, if need be, a month or two getting it right, as long as we only have to do one and not 100 different file formats. So that's where we are now, and I've become a zealot around one roster, and it comes from my days at the school. And we're beginning at the district where I came from, they're beginning to require one roster conformance or certification as a condition of doing business. So I think that's sort of where we are at this moment in time. And the latest 1.1, I think, is very, very good standard around making making this more and more a reality.
George, how would you, what would you think, when we talk about standards like that, I think some things that confuse some folks back on my side in the district level, we hear about EdFi too,
Sure.
the other standards that's out there. What, from your perspective, is some key things to delineate the two, because I think sometimes people get confused because they say, well, isn't a standard, we just need one standard. Why do we have this other one that's coming up?
Yeah, I mean, typically what will happen is you've got four competing standards, and somebody will say we need one standard. So then there's five.
Yeah.
So that's typically how things go. So EdFi is a standard that's out there that does a lot of this sort of same thing, except that the original intent with EdFi was to streamline state and national reporting. So the idea behind bringing some order to all the various fields inside of an SIS, especially around things like exceptional education students, discipline, test scores, those kinds of things, so that when you report up attendance, when you report up to the state, there's a common file format that people can use so that the data transfers smoothly. Now, what OneRoster is trying to do in terms of comparison is the OneRoster file format needs a much smaller data set. So in other words, it's sort of the OneRoster is sort of a subset of the much larger EdFi set, because OneRoster is not asking for stuff like discipline data and test scores and things like that. And of course, there is an alliance now between OneRoster and EdFi. It's something that is still sort of in development, but at least for the first time in recent memory, we have at least two organizations agreeing that they need to converge in order to make things easier. And up in the Northwest in particular, and up in the North, the EdFi is something that people are looking at very, very seriously. And of course, it's based on the CEDS, which is the Common Educational Data Standards. So we're seeing a convergence for the first time instead of a divergence with this. But understand, I think that the EdFi is a much larger data set, and was really designed around interoperability with state and federal reporting. But I think it's a great thing that they're trying to come together to make things easier for school districts.
I think that's
Kyle,
key. Yeah.
I was going to say, George had brought up a very interesting point having to do with tech departments, being able to generate, a file if it's in relatively simple format. I want to get your thoughts on the kind of the disconnect between a tech department and maybe, the curriculum group or at the superintendent level. I don't know that everyone really understands exactly the challenges that a tech department faces when it comes to interoperability and what's needed to make all this stuff work. Maybe your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, a lot of times, for us in technology, it's, I hate to say it, but it's just data. We sometimes don't know the contextual significance of each kind of data point or different things like that. We don't know the details of the schedule and all that. We're just passing data. So we need you to tell us, what information you need, and we can point it there. So what was happening and what happens a lot of times is that disconnect of curriculum or the other folks purchasing textbooks, hand it over to technology and the magic just happens. It's just going to happen. Just all the kids need to just appear in here. And so then we have the challenge of trying to coordinate back and figure out what information to pass. So it became a big disconnect with us having to understand the data, but make sure the data is pure in a sense. Because one thing that OneRoster will do is it's going to show you where your data is not very accurate. And that can be a painful situation for everybody. And all of a sudden you start realizing that maybe we're not scheduling correctly, or maybe we got duplicates of some class names or stuff like that. Well, it's going to be picked up and now reflecting into these textbooks and other resources. So it really put a lot of information on the table that brought a lot of teams together within the districts to kind of figure out how we're going to tackle this. And I think that's one thing we can kind of jump into and talk about, because there are a lot of my peers and y'all, when y'all were there too, struggle to figure out what's a game plan. How do I tackle this monster? What's some good steps to start going down this road of interoperability? Because as I talk to publishers and sales folks, sometimes they don't even want to discuss it because they're not too sure about it themselves.
Well, that's go ahead, George. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say that you brought up a really good point, Kyle. You know, when you mentioned that perhaps you're not scheduling properly, and you know, as you said, a tech group doesn't always have direct access to the kind of data that where they can check to see if something's scheduled properly. And I think, you know, some of the challenges that come up or have come up are sometimes answered by changes to the way the schedule is being entered into a student information system. And I think, you know, what's really required is that teamwork and that team or group effort to get this working properly. It's not just, well, you know, the tech group will make the magic happen. That, unfortunately, is sometimes the case. But I think more and more, as the data becomes more complicated, as the requirements become more complicated, and as the time window within which you've got to work gets shorter and shorter, you really need that team approach to make this all happen, because the tech group may be keeping the servers up and running, but they don't know, they can't, you know, speak to the validity of the information that's in it. And it really has to be all of the groups working together.
Yeah, Jeff, I mean, I can tell you, I can give you a great example of that. Like, one of the things around one roster, and you and I have discussed this, is that you have to have a unique ID for every class, right? And so, again, it's just data. But for some reason, if in midstream you're concatenating a bunch of fields in order to create a unique ID, and then something in that concatenation changes. Let's just say it's maybe you've created a unique ID for a class and you've included the teacher number, and then something happens and that teacher moves away and a new teacher comes in. The ID for that class changes, right? So now everything goes out the window, all your data is lost, and you know, from the IT perspective, look, it's just a unique ID. But from a curriculum perspective, that has caused a tremendous problem. So I don't think that it's you can do this without input from folks in the district to be able to say, you know, be careful when you do this, because it has an impact on children if you treat it just as data without any understanding of what the ramifications are of making changes. You know, especially when you change things in production. You know, that's typically a bad thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
I think it helps too, you know, in the past and sometimes still in the current, when curriculum and stuff, when we do that textbook adoption, the biggest challenge or hurdle we had to getting the books to the students was just logistically getting it from the warehouse into the hands of the student, and knowing that when Johnny comes to class the first day, the book's going to be there in the classroom. Well, now that we're digitized and so much, that challenge is much more complicated than just walking a book down the hall. We're virtually doing that and having to communicate in so many different terms to do that. For my district here, we're a pure one-to-one K-12 district, so our investment into digital resources is tremendous. And George alluded to it. In the past, we would be high-fiving each other if we got everything done by Thanksgiving. But that's not realistic anymore. You know, we can't sit and wait that long. I mean, what would happen in the past if those textbooks never got out of the warehouse till Thanksgiving? And now the curriculum department and everybody else is starting to realize that, up to the superintendent's level, that the need for this standardization is key, because we cannot spend the resources and time to custom fit your product into our environment. And I think that's what's important for a lot of us, and it really starts that engaging conversation that starts, you know, in the spring semester, preparing for the future, for the following school year.
But let me say this, as somebody who had to deliver 150 tractor trailer loads of reading materials to some schools, I don't want to minimize the effort associated with those books there. Okay, because you know, that was a hill I was about to die on.
Absolutely, literally.
And I will say that, trust me, I mean, I sometimes put textbooks in the back of my pickup truck and drove them out to schools. So, but I think that you know, we have a district in Florida who has an expectation, and their battle cry is digital day one. So
that's right.
The only way that this district in Florida has been able to enforce digital day one is to force their various vendors and publishers to conform to a standard. Because otherwise, because by the time you do what we used to call the flip or year-end processing of promoting all those kids and everything, that's July.
Yeah.
Right. So And then sometimes, and at least my experience has been, sometimes getting the schedules right in your student information system is not a priority for sometimes, especially the elementary schools.
No, we just want to get
well, you know, I mean, I'm not trying to knock them. I'm just saying traditionally it was done with yellow pads and blue and pink cards, and they post a list on the cafeteria window, and we'll put them in the SIS later. Well, when you get to this, I mean, if you don't have this done ahead of time, you know, you get the phone call, why can't my kids access? Well, duh, you didn't put them in the student information system. We can't allocate books based on a list on the window.
You know, as
school, let me ask a question.
School administrators, go ahead.
So here's my question. Can we give some advice here on what are some good practices? George, you mentioned that Digital Day One. I love that idea. How do you make that possible? And maybe sort of go around, and you see the screen here, I'm going to try to jot down some advice, and it needs to be sort of actionable, not sort of make a plan. That's not helping me. I need, like, specifics.
Absolutely. So I can kind of jump on that because I'm in that process here, being in a new district. So about 6 months in here, joining about March. So of course by March time frame, we're already knee deep in, you know, some adoption stuff already getting done and way ahead of what we're doing for next year. The first steps that I do to kind of evaluate what's going on is first take the pulse of the district and even understanding that there is a standard. For me here in Grapevine Colleyville, there wasn't much knowledge around there even being a standard. We had already hired a few positions to kind of custom do some of this stuff. So beginning to let the district leadership and everybody know, okay, let's hit pause a little bit because there's a standard we need to start asking people to conform to. And in order to do that is we need to start gathering some information. But what are we dealing with here? So asking curriculum to gather that list of all the various software and publishers. What are we buying? What do we have? Going to that poor guy that's buried in the IT department somewhere with spreadsheets and say, hey, do you happen to know how many spreadsheets you're custom doing? I don't want to freak you out, but do you happen to know what that number is? And then looking at it as a whole, how many do we have? And how big is this problem for us? Because I don't care what district you're in, you have this problem. Some of us, it might be larger or smaller, it might be one person doing it, it might be massive teams. And then really analyzing my source of authority, for lack of better terms. Is my primary data source, my student information system, even capable of conforming to the industry standards of the data exchange? Once I got that, and I'm sure that my student system can conform, I've got that battle won in a sense. So I know my data can come out. Now we go back to what we were talking about before. That doesn't necessarily mean that data is correct. I know it can come out in the format, but it doesn't mean it's coming out the right way. So that's kind of how we started the process here, you know, March into the school year, and really develop it, because we were already a little behind, to be honest with you. Normally, I would say if you're starting this, it's something January, February, you're already having these discussions and already started your background collection of information to see what you're dealing with. I don't know, George, being such a large district, is that kind of how y'all approached it?
Well, I mean, the first thing we realized is when you're going to do an adoption for a curriculum, you can't do it you need to have it done for the next year, usually, you know, early, like January, February, so that you've got time to work on the implementation. So that's important. Number two is to get executive buy-in. So I spoke to a district here in Florida, and he was so happy. He says, my superintendent gets it, and he's given us permission to say no to people who don't conform to the standard. So it's having backup from leadership to be able to say, we're behind you on this. So I think that's critical. And if the superintendent's not involved, then we have to engage the curriculum folks. And the way that you do that is you don't just open up when you have a solicitation for a curriculum and just say, everybody come and show us your stuff. You have to create a document of some kind that says a condition for doing business in our district is that you must conform to this standard. So in procurement terms, this is a must, not a want. You know, and if anybody who's done RFPs understands the difference. So you have to put in writing.
Question. Sure. Yeah, put it in writing, and you put it into bid specs, I suppose, something like that. What should the school leaders expect as a response from the vendors? Are they going to be pushing back? Are they going to say no problem? What should they expect?
I think when we first started doing this, there was a lot of pushback because they weren't ready for it. Somehow they didn't see it coming. But increasingly,
aren't they part of IMS Global, by the way? Aren't they? Like,
yeah, exactly. I think that. Yeah, I mean, it's very helpful that that you may even put in the thing that they need to be IMS Global certified, and to be certified, you have to go through conformance testing that says yes, you can accept these files, and which really is a flag for the district to be able to say, are you certified? So that would be the first. Are you certified? If you're not certified, will you take these files? Because what needs to happen is they need to do the work on their end because all the data is there. They need to do the field mappings or whatever needs to happen there in order to ingest that information, because we are working too hard to get information to people who we are paying.
Absolutely.
So
here's the other side, George, I think that you hear from these salespeople is, well, we're not one roster maybe, but we have a partnership with a free utility, and just send us, they'll take care of your data. Just give us the data. We'll make all that happen for you, Or the challenge that we have too, and I think when I was in some smaller districts, and we're still small, I mean, George, can talk from that perspective, the 10th largest, the reality is, folks, is it doesn't really matter the size of your district anymore. Everybody can take a stand and say, this is what we're doing, because it's commonplace. Now, in the beginning, it was very hard. When I was in a smaller district, I didn't have the pull of, the 10th largest, or here in Texas, the Houston and some of these others. But I tell you, large districts are behind it. We're all coming together as a team to say, this is our expectation. And big or small, we can all make that happen to be that digital day one as a reality.
So what's happening today? You talk to them now. What are they saying today?
Well,
you said in the past they were not prepared. Yeah.
For us, sometimes those initial sales folks, sometimes, unfortunately, they might not be at full knowledge level of what the company can actually do. Sometimes sometimes the challenge is getting to the right people within an organization or a publisher to talk about one roster. Usually when we mention it, sometimes I get that glazed over look. Yeah, I think we can do that. Is finding those right people in the company. George mentioned IMS Global. You can go to their webpage and you can see what companies, HMH, Pearson, all these that are on there, and say, these companies are certified. They've made an investment. It's getting to the right folks within the organization, and just keep asking those questions. And sometimes I've had to send the link from IMS Global page to that sales rep and say, listen, your company's here. You can do this. You are doing it. Let's find the right people to talk to.
Eric, don't you have a slide there somewhere that shows some of the companies who are sort of on board now?
Yeah, I do. Here we go.
I think you've got it in the deck there. There we go. So this is a slide that we put together that and I will say this, I gave a presentation at the Florida Ed Tech Conference 2 years ago, and I had about 5 of these vendors on my deck, but it was I told them you're gonna see it take off. So just in the last couple of years, you've got the major players here involved with doing this. Now, you still may run across some mom and pop operations that your curriculum people absolutely can't live without, but they're going to need to understand that if they don't conform to the standard, it might be a while. But you take a look. We've got Google here. In fact, Microsoft is on the steering committee with me, a fellow named TJ, and so they're working on being a part of this as well. And then you've got your various LMSs here. So you've got a lot of players here. And, as somebody in one of the counties told me, he said, nothing happens until somebody doesn't get paid. So, and Bears, put that on that list. Nothing happens until somebody doesn't get paid.
I'm going to write it down. That's a good line.
Yep.
Even the mom and pop organizations.
My response to that as well I don't think we can do that. And my response is, well, I don't think I can. That PO is probably going to get hung up somewhere in procurement.
Even the mom and pop organizations, when they realize that it's actually easier to conform to something like the IMS Global One Roster spec, one way or the other, they want data or they need data that identifies the users that need to be provisioned and what classes they're going to be in. They're going to either accept it in some format that they made up a couple of years ago, or they're going to change the format, maybe move some of the columns around and accept it in the One Roster specification format. It's not that complicated, and I think once districts realize that they've got the pull, they've got the gravitas to go in and say, look, you really got to do this, as you said, George. They really do have that ability to coerce these guys into moving it along. Now, there's another part to this. Once you pick a vendor and you insist that they're going to be One Roster, specification compliant and certified, the district then has to own the data. There's no magic there. You can't just say, well, now that they're certified, it's just going to happen, right? You've got to ensure that the data is accurate. And this is one of the big challenges moving forward, to ensure that you've got the right data in there, that the scheduling is done properly, that users are provisioned in, your usernames are following some format so that it's easy to maintain. And I think, the big advantages of making all this work are huge. As school administrators, we get into the habit of thinking about adults all the time. But if we consider what our real product is, start thinking about the students and the staff members that engage with our students, there's an enormous benefit to them to make this work. And ensuring that your data is accurate means that it's going to be a lot easier for them to make this happen.
All right. I have a question for you, because it sounds like you're saying some dialogue is needed. That's what I'm hearing, that communication needs to be made with these vendors, the publisher vendors, on accepting the one roster standard. And I want to do this as well, since you all talked about it. This is the IMS Global website, and anyone can go to this imsglobal.org. I clicked on Certified Products, which is this link right over here, and that comes a product directory. It's a little cumbersome, but you have to sort of filter through on the standard. So I chose One Roster, and here's a view of all the different companies that have that are certified. So even that slide that we had earlier is not exhaustive. This here is sort of all the different products that are certified for One Roster. I'm going to do this, though, because I think it's kind of fun to do some role playing. And George and Kyle and Jeff, you guys can play along. All right, so here's how we're going to do it. George, help us out. You're going to be the district person, and Jeff, sorry, I'm going to do it like this. Sorry, I'm going to change it around. Kyle, you're the district person, and you're calling on a vendor here. And let's pretend that, George, you're representing some publisher. Tell me what that conversation is. I don't even know what languages that we're supposed to be using. So go ahead and pretend you're having a phone call conversation. And Kyle, what is it that you're asking of this publisher vendor? Does that make sense?
I'll be honest. Yeah, it does.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, sometimes the conversation starts several different ways. Typically, the way it starts is I've already been told we bought the product, and now I got to figure out how to make it work.
What? Never.
Yeah, so now I'm calling vendors saying, hey, yeah, we really like that thing we bought, George. So how exactly are you going to connect and get this data to you?
Mr. Berger, Mr. Berger, you're going to be very, very happy with our new curriculum product. This alone is going to change your state test scores. You have very wise curriculum people. We're so happy to be working with your district. So what I brought to you is an Excel spreadsheet, and it's very simple. I'm just going to give this to you, and you need to fill it out, and then my tech people will get on board, and then we can get started with professional development.
Okay, so how am I getting? You don't know how I get this data to you, really? I need to then talk to technology, because I already have this data available. Can't we just connect to you and sync our systems together? Because some of this stuff you're asking.
I'm going to have to get my tech people involved, because that's something that they do.
Okay.
I'm sure it's a very simple process. We do it all over the place. And what we could do potentially is we could just let the teachers enter the student names and assign them a username and password. That would be probably the easiest thing for you to do.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable for my 1,000 teachers to undertake. We might be able to do that. It's only a little over 13,000 kids. I know that's not that many, but we can maybe do that. But do you work? My student system's Skyward. Do you connect with us?
I don't know very much about that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I know our
curriculum. All right, we need to go on. So we need to get transferred to level 2. This is horrible. This is a horror show. This is a horror show.
It's a real conversation.
I'm crying. Oh my God. Stop.
Yeah.
Okay. Round 2.
So from there,
Kyle, you got level 2 support or level 14 support. Go ahead. Now do it, George.
Once we get to the right people, and now we're talking to the right folks on how we're going to start exchanging data. It usually comes down to that data set. Okay, so I have this data into Skyward. Do you have any interoperability with Skyward? Have y'all taken extracts from Skyward, and what data format can I send it to you? A lot of times, I'll be honest, like George's side of the sales side is, it's just that spreadsheet. Just dump it in the spreadsheet and upload it to our FTP. And okay, George gave the scenario of him driving down the road in his pickup with the books in the back. So that's almost like, okay, I want to dump my data in this pickup and just fly it down the road to you. Who knows where it's gonna go, what's gonna happen with it, and then you're gonna figure it out on your side, right? And a lot of times, like, yeah, don't worry about it. We got it, right, George?
Oh yeah. And by the way, we need a particular data point that you don't store. So
yes, you have your own unique ID, right?
Correct. We have something they're called Pidz, and these are IDs. These are unique IDs that identify your schools in our system. So what we need for you to do is to create a table that will line up the ID that we have in our system with your ID, because we don't really care what you call it. It's important that you have our ID there.
Okay.
So the conversation that you guys are having right now, we hear this at ClassLink all the time. It's not unusual for a school district to pick a specific vendor and even notice that they're on the One Roster certified list, and they contact the vendor and say, all right, we're ready to use the ClassLink roster server, let's go. And they get someone who, the way George portrayed, we've never heard of it, or no, we don't do that, or just send us the spreadsheet. And we sometimes have to get involved because we do have contacts at all of these vendors, and the school district will ask us, like, what's going on here? I thought they're supposed to be certified. And we do sometimes make a call to our contact and say, look, school district X is going to be using the roster server with the One Roster spec, and we need to get the right people on board. And then George brought up, well, okay, we need to get Pidz out there. Well, that's not in the One Roster spec. How do we do that? We've done that kind of work also. The idea is to make life simpler for our customers, school districts. And, we sometimes twist arms a little bit, of vendors, but we always want to work with everyone. And making that kind of stuff work is what I think we bring to the table. So now those kind of conversations go on all the time, and there are answers to all of those issues. And I think as school districts, you have to know, when to be a little bit firm, when to contact, support, and we're always here to get involved in that kind of stuff. But I think it is moving forward. The current state of the art is where application vendors are getting on board. More and more school districts are demanding that they play the game and accept the data to make life easier for everyone.
And I just recently finished working on a document for IMS that we are probably going to adopt internally, because there are unique identifiers for every school in the country, and it's part of the NCES data standard, the National Center for Educational Statistics, that's out there, where every school in the country has a unique ID. And I would encourage anybody who's listening to make sure that you find a place in your SIS for that designation, because ultimately what we want to be able to do is to use those IDs, since they're unique across the country. It's a GUID, if you will. That doesn't necessarily work if you're across the pond, but within the U.S., we're hoping that the various publishers will start accepting that, because that is something you should have stored in your SIS. That unique ID for the from the National Center for Educational Statistics. Would you agree, Jeff? Wouldn't that simplify everybody's life?
It would. I think, you know, we've had that conversation with a number of districts as well. There are certain vendors that absolutely require the NCES ID in order to properly place resources. And, you know, we found that some SISs just don't have a comfortable place to enter that data, or, you know, maybe the tech department doesn't have, and this gets back to the issue we discussed before, they don't have direct access to the SIS user interface, so they can't go in and enter that stuff, and no one knows anything about it. You know, what we've done is we've gone online and gotten the NCES IDs for each of the schools and for the district, and even if you can't get them into the SIS user interface directly, we can inject that data using, you know, scripts and other, you know, custom data interchanges that we've developed. Obviously, it's not the kind of thing we like to do all the time. I get back to what I said before, you've got to own your database. If you can get all this stuff standardized and set up so that you don't have to do a lot of customization of the data interchange, the interoperability works better. But in that absence, which is, as I said, currently state-of-the-art, you know, it's a little bit of a growing situation here. We find that we need to do that from time to time.
Well, I agree. The thing that's important to recognize is, unlike a PID associated with a particular publisher, this is a global identifier across the country. So there's a reason to have that somewhere, as opposed to trying to store 10 different vendors' individual identifiers for your school. So I think there's a big difference between the two, obviously.
Well, I think
right.
with some of that,
time out. This is Bearish. Okay, so I feel like we're lost in the weeds here a little bit. And some people who are maybe on the call may not understand sort of the depth of what we're talking about here. So bring it back up. Give me some oxygen here. So
that's what I was going to say, is that I think that's a little intimidating for some folks who are just trying to get their heads around some of this. So kind of to bring it back to how do you start this whole process in your district, and how do you get there? We talked about gathering who all these vendors are and all these spreadsheets. I think the slide you see here showed you some heavy hitters. You know, you take advantage of some of that low-hanging fruit. And these are people who have proven, certified, can do the one roster standard, to show that these are folks we can connect with and have this solution working. You know, don't get in the weeds and bury down with those that aren't compliant and trying to force somebody to fit in. Let's take the low-hanging fruit and get some easy wins with some of these folks that are already there to get the momentum behind it. Because ultimately what we want to be able to do with interoperability standard is get this common language out there, I believe, to where now those salespeople and vendors, they spew out LDAP all the time. How do you connect? Oh, we LDAP, you know. We want them to be able to say this with like one roster too. We want that to be the common knowledge that we all talk in this realm of data interoperability and the one roster standard. So it's not having to re-explain every time what is that. I think that's where we're trying to get to.
So my sense is hold on one second. When I have this conversation with folks, it's pretty typical where they really don't know where to begin. And then another thing that tends to happen, it just happened to me this morning. I was on the phone with a school district in sort of the Pacific Northwest region, and the fellow said, well, I thought this was going to solve everything. I today have, you know, whatever, 50 spreadsheets I got to do individually, and I thought this was going to, you know, make it all into one. And I sort of needed to recalibrate their thinking, and I'd like for you all to comment on this, recalibrate their thinking and say, well, I think maybe one day that's our driving goal, that one spreadsheet or one format works across everyone. But to presume that we can go from whatever, your 50 individual ones to a single one in 1 year, that might be sort of unrealistic, I think. It's not sort of, it's probably very unrealistic. So what should be realistic here? If I have, and I'm a big district, I might not have 50, I could have 100. I mean, we work with school systems that give us a list of 150 resources. Maybe not every one of them needs rostering of the whole student body, but there's definitely more than a handful of accounts in each one of these. So walk me through what reasonableness looks like in this area.
I think that's a very good. That's a very good question, Bears, and we've had situations where exactly what you described happened, where a district gets on, they've got lots of resources and lots of students and lots of courses, and they don't necessarily own their data up front, and they send it off, and or they don't send it off and say, well, okay, get my data to all these application vendors. Well, you got to send it to us first, and we got to get all the errors out of it, and we got to make sure. So, and it starts out a little bit rocky, perhaps, with some of these districts that don't own their data. But ultimately, what ends up happening, I think, is once they realize how the process works and that there's no magic involved, it's straight, get an accurate data set together, and we'll get it off, and we'll work with you to get your data off to these vendors, and the vendors will work with you to understand what it is you're sending them, and everybody troubleshoots what the problems are. The end game, the end result is almost always where everything that they expected works the way they wanted it to. The challenge comes into when you've got a lot of expectations and you don't understand how everything's going to work, and you don't have that ownership or that local interaction between different groups, so that you can get accurate data out. But I think ultimately it is a positive experience, and we've had lots of districts that started out making demands, well, this was supposed to be magic, just click a shiny red button and it works. And then after a short period of time, they start speaking the language just like we do, and they start to understand how it works, and they become much happier after that.
All right, we're just about at the end of our time. I have maybe another minute or two, so I want realistic. So George, Kyle, give me numbers. Do I go from 50 down to how many should I expect? Can I move my vendors to a one roster format? Can I do 4 dozen in the first year? What's the reality there?
So I can talk from our perspective where we are today, 6 months in, is we've probably moved maybe half a dozen, if that many, through our first year, and that's of 100+ various folks. It's because we need to get back to making sure that data is pure. I mean, if I was to try to turn on everybody at once, I would have a bigger mess, and then that trust, in a sense, that I've tried to instill with my curriculum, my superintendent on this standard, is lost. We got to take a strategic approach and slowly chip away at this. And that's why I get back to hitting the heavy hitters in it to work with first that really get it, and just do it a little bit out of a time and build in. So yeah, today we're still building some custom spreadsheets. We're still doing some exchanges that I'm not comfortable with. But we have set the standard and are on the process of getting that fixed.
And George, what have you seen in Orange County? How many did they bite off, and how many are now taking one roster? Just give me a number so I have a sense. Is it?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we were sort of out front with this and pushing the envelope, but we've probably got, similar to Kyle, probably, I think that we've got a few more, maybe 8 or 9 that are out there in terms of accepting one roster. But back to your original, when we started this, we had past, present, future. So I mean, we're on a journey here to make this happen, and we're still a little ways off. Now, to put a positive spin on this standard's only been around for about 2.5 years, but it has gained tremendous momentum. So while it's not reasonable to say, okay, we're going to flip the switch, our life is easy, everything's great, it's still going to be a little while before everybody does it. But it really depends on people, assuming leadership roles. And I presume that people who are on this webinar are very much in favor of taking that leadership.
Okay. All right. I'm going to have to cut it there. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you, everyone, for the conversation. I think these kinds of dialogues need to happen for our own professional development in the industry, and to share with one another what our experiences are. It sounds like this is absolutely the direction that a lot of the industry players are going to, but like anything in education, just nothing happens overnight. But this is positive progress, and it sounds like there's a good deal of enthusiasm, not only amongst here ourselves, but I know the conferences that we attend, and even the publishers and providers that all of us in the industry count on. They too are enthusiastic about a simpler, more standardized way of getting information, and a way that should be easier for school districts. And we all sort of need to be reminded that they too want what's easiest for the school districts to get those lists. I have here on the screen our contact information, and you're all more than welcome to chat with us if you have any questions. I hope we were able to answer at least a few thoughts you all had on this topic. I want to thank our panelists, Kyle, George, and Jeff, for your insights. Conversation feels like it's one of those that can go on, and maybe it makes sense to do a round two and sort of share what's happened in the meantime. With that said, I wish everybody have a great afternoon and rest of your day, and keep up the good fight when it comes to moving to open data standards. Thanks, everyone.
All right, we're in it together, folks. Have a good one.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.